Okay, so good evening to everyone. Firstly, a happy new year to you all. So I hope you're all well rested. I mean, your holidays still aren't over, but we have to begin with online classes because elections will be held at the end of February. So because of that, we'll be missing a lot of classes in between. So that's why we're going ahead with online classes. These will be short, just to make up for whatever classes we end up missing due to elections. So anyway, this is paper 2, which is Development and Environmental Economics. Today we will start with Unit 5, which is a part of Environmental Economics. So the paper is divided into 5 units. The first 3 units fall under Development Economics, and the last 2 units, 4 and 5, will be Environmental Economics. So today we'll begin with Unit 5, which is Market Failure and the Environment. So we're beginning with this unit because it picks up exactly from where you've left off in paper 1. So remember in paper 1, what did we do? We did something called perfect competition. We made some simple assumptions. We said that in perfect competition, there's a large number of firms. Then we also said there's a large number of consumers or buyers. Then we said that the products of all these firms are homogeneous, which means they're the same. They are perfectly substitutable. Then we also said that buyers and sellers have perfect information. That means they know the quality of the product. They also know what the price is at the market level. Then we said there's free entry and exit of firms, which means if anyone wants to start producing, they can. If they want to exit from the market, also they can. And then finally, the demand curve at the firm level is perfectly elastic. So which means that your demand curve is a perfectly horizontal line like this. At the firm level. At the industry level, of course, it is downward sloping. So now, the extra assumptions that we also implicitly made, we never explicitly stated what these assumptions are. But nevertheless, it is good to talk about what they are. So one of these assumptions is that, okay, just give me a second. Okay, yes, so one of these assumptions is that the good that is being produced and sold is a private good. So what is this private good? We'll talk about a bit later, but this is one of the implicit assumptions we make. Then we also say that property rights are well defined. So what do we mean when we say property rights? It means we know who owns what. If I buy a 10 rupee packet of chips, then property rights get transferred from the seller to the buyer. The shopkeeper no longer can claim ownership over that packet of chips. After paying that 10 rupees for the packet of chips, I become the owner of that packet of chips. So that's what we mean when we say property rights are well defined. That means we know who owns what, simply speaking. Another assumption is that there are no external effects or externalities. Again, this is something we will talk about later. So in fact, this concept of private and public as well as externalities, they will form some part of market failure, as we'll see. There'll be separate sections dedicated to these, and they're quite important. And then another implicit assumption is that there are no transaction costs. So if I go to buy a packet of chips from the shopkeeper, I'm only going to pay 10 rupees for the packet of chips. There'll be no other costs that come in. Like I won't take into account maybe the cost of my time to go to the shop, maybe the cost of my energy, etc. So all these costs, we assume that they don't exist. So are we clear so far?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then moving ahead. So now what is market failure? So we know what a market is. We know what perfect competition is. So market failure simply then is any situation where one of the assumptions of perfect competition fails. So all those assumptions that we talked about previously, whether they're the standard assumptions that we took in paper 1 or one of these new assumptions that we added, one of these has to fail. That means the moment one of these does not hold, then we say that perfect competition no longer holds either, and therefore we have a market failure. Now, why do we call it a failure? So if you remember, we did something called efficiency in paper 1. We said that the reason why we study perfect competition as a benchmark case is because it's the perfect market. That everybody's happy in this market. You maximize producer surplus, you maximize consumer surplus, and therefore you have efficiency. Now, when you have market failure, then you end up having outcomes that are not efficient. That means you no longer have efficiency. Efficiency is thrown out the window. So now, why is it important that we study market failure? Because remember, at the end of the day, we are interested in welfare. We are interested in making sure that everyone is happy with the system. Like, we want to make sure that everyone's a winner, there are no losers. Now, what happens then if a market fails? That's where the government comes in. So normally, this is one of the first reasons as to why the government intervenes in the market. It intervenes in free markets so as to bring about efficiency once again. Okay, sorry about that. I'll put my phone on silent. So yes, just to repeat what I was saying, governments normally intervene when there's a market failure because they want to bring about efficiency. That means they want to make sure that everyone is happy, that welfare is maximized. Now, why is this concept of market failure being studied here in environmental economics? It's because of a certain type of goods that we call environmental goods. Now, we'll go into detail as to what environmental goods are. But what you need to understand is that environmental goods do not conform to the assumptions of perfect competition. That means 1 or 2 or 3, we don't know how many, we'll see later, but some assumptions of perfect competition fail when we are dealing with environmental goods. And therefore, when you're dealing with environmental goods, that means there will be losers, there will be winners, and therefore there will be inefficiency. Your market will not be able to allocate these goods efficiently. So now, what are these environmental goods? So simply speaking, they are nothing but goods and services produced by the environment. So some very simple examples can be air, clean air particularly. Nobody wants to talk about dirty air. Water, again, you want to talk about clean water. Then there can be things such as parks as well, rivers, mountains, forests, beaches, etc. Even something like ecosystem services offered maybe by forests, whether it's in terms of aesthetics or in terms of their participation in different cycles like the water cycle, nitrogen cycle, etc. All these things fall under environmental goods and environmental services. Now, remember earlier I said something. I said that in perfect competition, the goods that we study are private goods. Now, environmental goods are not private goods, they are public goods. So, like I said earlier, we'll be discussing this separately and in detail. So now, why does the environment lead to market failure? So you have to understand that when you're dealing with the environment, you're not dealing with a private good like a packet of chips. You're not dealing with something that can just be easily bought and sold. Think about air, for example. Do we all prefer clean air or dirty air? Clean or polluted air? How can we not know the answer? Somebody can tell me. Do we like clean air or do we like dirty air?
Clean air, sir.
Clean air.
Yes, we all like clean air. So that means you can say that you can express a preference, right? You're expressing a choice that if given the choice between breathing clean air and dirty air, you'd prefer to breathe in clean air. So the moment there's a choice, then you know that economics is concerned, because that's what economics is all about, right? It's all about making choices. So as you've said, you prefer to breathe in clean air, but do you pay a price for clean air?
No, sir.
Exactly.
No.
So now, because there is no price for clean air, that means there is no market for it. Again, to repeat, we all can express preferences over air. We all we all prefer clean air over dirty air. So that means, yes, there is a preference, and yes, there is a choice associated with that preference, but we do not pay a price for it. And the reason is because there is no market for air. So that's why there's a market failure when we're dealing with environmental goods. It's because there's no market in the first place. So therefore, even if we try to impose a market, it will end up being an inefficient market. It will yield outcomes that are not efficient. So anyway, we'll talk about this more later, but for now, this is the concept. This is why the environment leads to market failure, because there is no market, or there's no proper market that can regulate how different environmental goods are allocated. So why do we study environmental economics? So just now we talked about how the environment leads to market failure. Now let's talk about why we have to dedicate an entirely different paper or different subject of study to environmental economics. So firstly, we want to look at the impact of the economy on the environment, because we know production depends on a lot of resources that you do obtain from the environment, natural resources. Secondly, environmental economics is also concerned with the significance of the environment to the economy. So it's a two-way relationship. It's not just that the economy depends on the environment also depends on the economy. And finally, we study environmental economics because we also want to figure out a way out of this market failure that environmental goods bring about. That means we want to find a way to regulate economic activity so that you bring about efficiency. How? By basically bringing about a balance between different types of goals, environmental, economic, and social goals. So this is why we study environmental economics. So now let's go into the different types of market failures. So one of them we've already looked at before, the first being imperfect competition. So this has already been done in paper 1. In fact, we'll just be repeating whatever we've done in paper 1 here as well. So there's nothing new there. Now, the next 7 market failures are new. So one is called missing or incomplete market. Then we have asymmetric information, indivisible goods, merit, and also demerit goods, but we won't talk about this much here. Then there's macroeconomic instability, public goods and bads, and externalities. Now, these last 2 are very important, and we'll be talking about these in detail. In fact, even if you check your syllabus, these are mentioned separately. So questions can come just from these 2, even though they are under market failure. You can get questions that are dedicated to only these 2 topics separately. So are we okay so far?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so any questions before I move forward?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll hang on for about 30 seconds. If not, then we'll move ahead.
Sir, are we gonna enter into this types of market failures deeper?
Yeah, we're going to do all these in detail now.
Okay.
So the first market failure we look at is imperfect competition. Again, we're just going to revise everything we did last semester. So what is imperfect competition? Again, from the term itself, imperfect, it means that one of the assumptions of perfect competition does not hold. So particularly the assumption that does not hold is the first assumption. That is, there is a large number of firms producing and selling a good. When we're dealing with imperfect competition, now we don't have a large number of firms producing and selling a good anymore. It can be 1 firm, it can be 2 firms, it can be 3, and so on. Basically, it has to be a small number that is finite, that is countably finite, that you can count maybe on your fingers. So what happens when you have a small number of firms is that these firms are no longer price takers, but they become price makers. That means they can set the prices of their goods. They no longer take the price as given by the market to them, rather they become the market themselves and they get to set prices. So this is the market failure that takes place when we have imperfect competition. So again, what are the different types of market structures? We've already talked about this. Monopoly is one, duopoly, then you have oligopoly and monopolistic competition. We'll go through them again. So monopoly mono meaning single firm producing a good, and poly meaning many buyers. So monopoly is a situation where you have only one firm producing and selling a good and many buyers that buy or consume that good. Now, what brings about this monopoly is the fact that there are no close substitutes for that good that is being produced by the monopolist. That means that monopolist is the only one producing and selling that good. Nobody else can produce anything similar to that good. Now, as a result, then the monopolist has market power because the monopolist is the market. And therefore, the monopolist can set prices rather than take prices as given. And of course, let's not forget that there are strong barriers to entry in a monopoly. That's what makes a monopoly, right? The fact that not anyone can enter the market and start producing. It takes some effort. I mean, we don't know. There are many causes, as we'll talk about later, but these causes of monopoly end up being barriers to other firms for when they want to enter the market. Okay, please hold. I think my screen is hanging. Okay, is my screen visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir.
Okay, now we move on to oligopoly. So again, oligopoly. So poly means many buyers. Oligo meaning a few, means a select few. Whoever that is, can you please mute? Okay. So in oligopoly, then you have you have two or more than two firms producing and selling a good. So it is not such a big number that you end up having perfect competition, but it's some small number, something that you can count, maybe up to 10. We don't know, but that's what we mean when we talk about oligopoly. Now we have two types of oligopoly. We have pure oligopoly and differentiated oligopoly. So in a pure oligopoly, it means that you have many firms that produce close substitutes, which means they produce goods that are very similar. But in differentiated oligopoly, it means you have a small number of firms producing goods which are similar, but there are some differentiating aspects. There can be anything. For example, when you're talking about biscuits, then you may talk about biscuits which have a cream center, or you might have a chocolate center. So that's what we mean when we say differentiated oligopoly. Now, even here, barriers to entry apply, which means that there must be some difficulty to enter the market such that only a few firms can set up. But the difference in oligopoly is that, because you have more than one firm, the degree or the power of firms to set prices is not as much as that of monopoly. In fact, now firms can influence the actions of other firms. That means what I price my product will affect someone else's decision to price their product. Anyway, we don't need to go into this in detail. You can go back to paper 1 if you need to remember this. Then, of course, we have monopolistic competition. This we've done in some detail. Now, there are two words here, monopolistic and competition. So it shows features of both monopoly and perfect competition. Now, it is perfectly competitive because there's a large number of firms and a large number of buyers. So that's why it resembles perfect competition. But it is monopolistic because each firm has some monopoly over some defining characteristic of their products. Again, let's talk about Oreo. We know that only Cadbury can manufacture something like Oreo because that's its defining feature. Sure, there might be other substitutes, but the moment you see those substitutes in your mind, you'll also think, okay, that's an Oreo. So brand power, for example, can be an example of monopoly over product variation. Then, of course, the iPhone. Again, no other firm can produce an iPhone. Likewise, no other firm can produce a Samsung Galaxy. Why? Because there are some defining features that make these phones what they are. For the iPhone, it may be the design, it may be the operating system, it may even be that notch at the top. So all that. So that's what gives firms monopoly power, the fact that they can choose how to make their product different from the rest in the market. So that is what is monopolistic about this market. Now there's freedom of entry and exit. because like I said, it's perfect competition. And then finally, because there are many firms in the market and all of them are producing and selling, so their output makes up only a small percentage of the total market. So that means they do not have the power to set prices. It's not like a monopoly where, that monopolist's output is 100% of the market. Here, it's like there are many firms participating in the market, but none of them can control the market. None of them can sell, or none of them maybe sell to 50% of the market. They all sell very small proportions. Maybe Samsung controls only 10%, Apple sells only 10%, etc., so on and so forth. So therefore, none of these firms have the power to set prices. They have to a certain degree, because that's otherwise, all phones would cost the same in the market. But they don't, and the reason is because of this brand power or this variation that, because my phone is different from some other phone that's being sold in the market. So I can price mine a little differently, maybe because of an extra feature that I've added. So anyway, this is imperfect monopolistic competition. We don't need to go into it in detail. Now, once again, we'll look at the sources or causes of imperfect competition. So the first is patents or copyright. So again, if the company AstraZeneca chooses to make a vaccine, they can file for a patent over that vaccine so that only they have the right to produce it and sell it. If anybody else wants to reproduce that vaccine, then they must get a license from AstraZeneca. So that's what a patent does. It gives you monopoly power. And who gives you this power? It's the government. Or it can be the World Trade Organization, or whichever organization looks after looks after intellectual property rights. Now, the copyright is also the same thing. It's just that it does not apply to inventions. It'll apply to things like music, literature, artwork, etc. Then control over essential raw materials can also be a cause of monopoly. Maybe that raw material can only be found on one person's land, but no other person's land. So therefore, this person can use that raw material to create some product which nobody else can. Then there's grant of franchise by the government. Maybe the government allows only one producer to produce. So this is what we call a natural monopoly. It's not because of any barriers as such, but rather because the government has given the right to a certain firm to produce. That's why that firm has monopoly power. So again, the best example I can tell you is Tata in Delhi. Only Tata is allowed to distribute electricity in Delhi, even though electricity is something that anyone can, at least in Delhi, anyone can produce it or distribute it, but only Tata has the right to, because the government has given Tata the franchise. Then, of course, there's economies of scale, which is again another form of natural monopoly. Maybe one firm can produce better than other firms. They are more efficient in producing, and therefore they can, price their products cheaper, therefore giving them some sort of monopoly power. So this is another example. Then advertising and brand loyalty. Again, maybe you can differentiate your product so much that you gain a following, a fan following. Or maybe you do so much advertising that people are not aware of other substitutes, they're only aware of your product. Then technological innovations. Again, maybe you are able to innovate something in your production process, therefore making you more efficient than other firms. Then large fixed costs. So maybe anyone can start producing electricity, but only a few players can because of these large fixed costs. It's very expensive to start producing electricity because remember, you have to find a river first of all. You have to build a dam around the river, therefore turning into a lake. So therefore, this is not something that any player can just come in and do. Only somebody with very deep pockets can. In the case of Meghalaya, it's the government. No private player can produce electricity here. Only the government can, because only the government can overcome these large fixed costs. And then finally, product differentiation. Again, the fact that you can differentiate your product from others, that also gives you some form of monopoly power. Now, once again, what are the implications of monopoly? So this is very important because this is what gives rise to the market failure. So the fact that when you're dealing with imperfect competition, your first order condition no longer holds. So remember, in perfect competition, we said price is determined by the point where MR and MC intersect, right? Like, in fact, your equilibrium looks something like this. So wherever P equals MR equals MC, that is where you have equilibrium in perfect competition. But when you have imperfect competition, this no longer holds. We no longer have P equals MC equals MR. Now there's no equality between all this. So that's the first implication of monopoly, giving rise to market failure. And second, this is your long run condition. Now P does not equal MC, does not equal minimum of AC, as it does in perfect competition. So this no longer holds. So your short run equilibrium doesn't hold, neither does your long run equilibrium. And that is why we have inefficiency. If you remember, taking the example of monopoly, actually in all the cases, not just monopoly, even in monopolistic competition, what we've seen is that firstly, the price that is sold in imperfect competition, it is much greater than that of perfect competition. Moreover, the quantity sold in imperfect competition is less than that sold in perfect competition. So these are the sources of inefficiency. And that's why you have market failure. So are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Again, if you don't remember any of this, go back to paper 1, but you don't need to go into this in detail because you won't get a separate dedicated question on this. In fact, if they ask you a question from this section, it'll be on all the market failures at one go. So it'll ask you to define what market failure is and to talk about the different types of market failures. So for that, you have to be very short and brief. So now let's talk about the solution then. So again, remember, we're in the world of environmental economics, no longer in the world of paper 1. So we're not just going to stop at discussing, what the equilibrium looks like in imperfect competition. Now we're going to talk about the solution. So how do we correct the market failure caused by imperfect competition? So as I said before, the government normally intervenes in such a case. So the government will intervene with what we call regulation. That means it will try to regulate that market which follows imperfect competition. So it'll try to regulate the monopolist or the oligopolist or those firms that are in monopolistic competition. So how does the government do this? Firstly, by using price limits or caps. So which means the government will put a cap on the price of products that are produced imperfectly. So it'll say, okay, you cannot you cannot sell your product above 100 rupees, neither can you sell it below 80 rupees. You have to sell it anywhere between this band. So this is what we mean by a price limit. So the government sets limits, upper limits and lower limits, so that the market starts to, so at least the prices reflect that of perfect competition. Now the government can also regulate mergers and the concentration of power. So let's say there are 5 firms that are taking part in a market. Let's say it's the telecom market. So the telecom market, there used to be, okay, so currently there is Airtel, we still have BSNL, Vodafone is there. Now there used to be Idea, it was separate. Aircel used to be there. Docomo used to be there. Are there any that I'm missing?
Jio.
Okay, so no, Jio. So Jio's a new player, but okay, let's mention. No, so Jio is not Jio, it's called Reliance. So let's call it Reliance. So you see, once upon a time, there used to be this many firms taking part in the telecom market. But what have we seen today? We've seen that Idea no longer exists. It's merged with Vodafone. Aircel doesn't exist. Docomo doesn't exist. Reliance also, it's been dissolved, and now we have Jio. And BSNL, well, I mean, it's still there, but it's not doing well. So what do you see? We see that earlier there were like 9-10 firms. Now we have just 4 main firms that provide mobile services in the country. So what is happening is, because of mergers, so the merger that we're talking about is Vodafone and Idea. So because of these mergers, your market is starting to resemble more of an oligopoly rather than a perfectly competitive market. So then what can the government do here to regulate such a market? So firstly, maybe it can prevent mergers from happening, or it can choose to participate itself. So that's why BSNL is still here today. BSNL exists so as to provide some form of competition to Airtel, Vodafone, and Jio. I mean, that's what it is supposed to do in theory. Whether it's doing that or not is a different question. But that is the justification for why BSNL still hasn't exited the market, even though it's not doing well. It is just there so that the market doesn't turn into a, in this case, it'll be a triopoly with just Airtel, Vodafone, and Jio. So are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So now what it can also do is it can break or split up a monopoly. So if it notices that there is only one firm producing in the market, then it directs that firm to split up. So maybe it's just firm A that's producing diamonds. Then it'll tell firm A, no, you split up into firm A, B, and C. And you all can produce diamonds. Again, why is it doing this? So that it brings back competition into a market that doesn't have any. Now it can also investigate into, so a cartel is nothing but an oligopoly. So it can investigate into oligopolies, and if they're practicing or any unfair trade practices, then again, it can choose to regulate and direct them as to how they can conduct themselves so that they bring about competition once again. And then finally, if there are monopolies that cannot be regulated with any of the above four, then the government can nationalize. What does nationalization mean? It means that it will purchase the monopoly, it will acquire the monopoly, and the government itself will become the monopoly. Because we know the moment the government does that, then its objectives will be different from that of the monopoly. Remember, the government's main objective is welfare. It's not to make money. So therefore, this is like the last option, nationalization. Okay, so Zacchaeus has raised his hand. Do you have any questions? Okay, apart from Zacchaeus,
sir.
does anyone have any questions?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Like not directly connected, but where do we draw the line of when a market is doing good? Is it on the profit basis?
So again, there's no clear-cut way to identify whether a market is behaving perfectly or not, because as like I've told you before, perfect competition is something that does not necessarily exist in the real world. So I mean, that's why we have, so at least in India, we have something called the Competition Commission of India. So the CCI is what will investigate and see. It will look into things like unfair trade practices. It'll investigate and see whether, okay, this firm is behaving like a cartel or not. So I mean, generally cartels, yes, that is one sign of imperfect competition. When, you know, a small number of firms gang up and they start behaving like a monopoly. In fact, that's what you see nowadays, right? With Jio, Airtel, and Vodafone. Because there are only three firms, again, I'm not talking about BSNL, but because there are only three private players in the market, they have started behaving like a cartel. Have you seen their prices? If you've noticed that, you know, internet packs across all these three firms, they're more or less the same, right? They offer very similar internet packs. So is that a result of perfect competition, or is that a result of them behaving like a cartel? So that is what the Competition Commission of India will be doing. They'll be investigating to see if, you know, these three firms are behaving like a cartel or if they're behaving competitively. So again, just to answer your question in short, there is no clear-cut way. It depends from country to country, and it depends on different laws, etc.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, we've already gone 5 minutes beyond time, so I don't want to drag this any further. So this is where we'll stop for today. So once again, if there are any other questions, you can ask me now.
Thank you.
Okay, then we'll end here today. On Thursday, we'll continue with the remaining market failures. So we'll go ahead with missing markets. Anyway, thank you, class. Have a good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Nice, sir.